Welcome to the Hedgineer Podcast, hosted by Michael Watson.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to season 2 of the Hedgineer Podcast, where we talk about AI, data, and technology within the asset management, hedge fund, and prop trading space. We have an awesome lineup of entrepreneurs and thought leaders in the AI and data space on deck for the new season. Excited to kick off season 2 with a repeat of season 1. Thomas, the CEO of Daloopa, is going to come on and we're going to talk about how much has changed since the last episode that we had with them, specifically around the AI and data space. They have a really interesting announcement where they're partnering with Anthropic financial services offering to allow users to access the whole of the Daloopa data ecosystem directly within Claude via MCP servers that you can call out to get company financials and company data, information around companies themselves without having to go through a traditional UI interface or via something like a Snowflake or Databricks share. And it's kind of changing up the way that data providers are delivering information into asset managers and hedge funds, but also changing the way that asset managers and hedge fund users, whether that's somebody more on the research side or somebody in back office, are interacting with software and information and moving away from something like a Tableau or Power BI or a custom built application and into something that's more free-flowing, where like UI can be auto-genned based off of different data sources that don't necessarily have to be pre-joined together, but can be accessed by the language model itself. And then the language model does the determination of which data sources to call for certain problems, how you can join them together, sometimes on the fly without the need of a security master or the need of a centralized source of truth that resolves these different systems together and go directly towards solving problems. And it's kind of like this interesting transition that we're going through as an industry of how much do you need to build out a cohesive data warehouse and ecosystem to join all of these different sources together. Let's normalize them and structure them, something like a Databricks or a Snowflake, or use some of the other like traditional providers like an MIK or an IVP to do this, and starting to lean more on the language models for us. So super excited about that episode that's coming up with Thomas. But then what are the other types of conversations that are happening around that? It's going to be an awesome season. I can't wait to be able to go through this new journey with all of the audience as I'm like learning and building stuff at the same time. Because Hedgineer as a company has also taken a pretty large move from where we were just a year and a half ago. We started with just the podcast, right? This is a space that I've been passionate about since I was working at Citadel starting in 2015 up through 2022, like as an individual like software dev working on risk, or how do we deal with analyst financial models? How do we then start ingesting alternative data and building out engineering platform that bridges risk, research, trading, and operations into a bit of a flywheel. And then kind of like left that role after I was running all the technology for like the equities team. I was head of data engineering. I ran head of enterprise data for both Citadel Securities and Citadel the hedge fund. I'm like the enterprise data platform. So I started the podcast just by being passionate about the space. And one of the things that I've noticed as an engineer is you share your passion with the world, and then the world finds people that share that same passion and interest and shares it back with you. And so we took the podcast, and the second that I had a pretty long non-compete with Citadel ended, I was then able to start taking on clients. We're like, hey, like you speak and you know a lot about software engineering within hedge funds, especially building out data platforms. Would you be interested in helping us build on ours? And of course, like if I love the space enough to be able to talk about it on a podcast, I'm going to love it enough to be able to go and like actually use my hands to build these things that I'm passionate about. And we assembled a team, built a data platform for one new launch that was more of a long short only, focusing just on the security master, and then took on another client that was focused on more biotech in therapeutics and like what is their overall data strategy. Another fund within the private or within the more of the credit space, bank loans, fixed income. Started working with a mid-tier but awesome long-short equity fund. Now working with like a very large asset manager that's even bigger in terms of AUM of what I've historically worked with, even in my prior employer. Working with a new launch that is just thinking about their data strategy for this time and then taking on another new launch client. And so just by sharing the things that I'm passionate about around how you think holistically about a data strategy, how you actually then go and build that within a cloud environment that joins different information about your fund admin, to your position management system, to your OMS system, to a risk system, to an RMS, and then coalesce around a common set of identifiers for a security master, an issuer master, position master, transaction master, pricing master. These just core concepts of building data platforms within a asset manager and hedge fund that are just best practices. Like there's no secret sauce to a lot of this. It's relatively well known, it's just hard work. And then getting the opportunity to like take this Hedgineer podcast, which originally just a passion project, and turn that into a company where we're building out all of these things that we've been talking about on the podcast since season 1, and then turning that into a Databricks or Snowflake set of environment assets that we can then immediately deploy within our clients, either Azure, AWS, or GCP tenant. We have all of the connectivity built into the common data providers that exist across our clientele. So for example, like most of our clients use one of 2 fund admins, Morgan Stanley Fund Services or HedgeServe. For their OMS system, most of our clients use a FlexTrade or an Infusion or a Bloomberg AIM or a Charles River. For their PMS or Shadow Nav, they either use like an FIS VPM or an Infusion or an Arcesium. When they're thinking about like fundamental estimates, they oftentimes will use a Visible Alpha or a FactSet or a Daloopa. When they think about like where a lot of this is deployed and in a lot of like their internal notes, like most people use Outlook, most people use SharePoint, most people use Excel. And so all of those different combinations of vendors, of which there's probably like many more than what I just mentioned, have APIs, they have integration endpoints, and you can then start building reusable ways that you might connect to your Infusion instance, or a reusable way that you might connect to your Snowflake share with Visible Alpha, or reconnect to the way that you connect to either Bloomberg's Data License Plus, or SAPI, to be able to ingest the information that you need to build a very strong foundation on. And like one of the things we realized after going through this multiple times is like, once you have that integration defined and you have that data model built on a Databricks or Snowflake, you can just kind of print and repeat that. Anyways, building out the company's been great, and we're taking on like some amazing clients. Like, so it's been awesome to take, again, this passion project and turn it into a company that's like thriving and profitable and feels like there's like no end in sight for the most part. And that brings us up to AI and like how it's really changed building out just technology and software in 2025 relative to what it was like just like a year and a half ago. And like some example, like we now like live and breathe within Claude Code. And I think also a lot of like the Claude Code SDK. There's a lot of tools that have come out that have been really powerful. But one of the things that just been really powerful for me and a lot of the people on our team is the very simple concept of using a REPL inside of a framework like Claude Code and allowing Claude Code to call out to tools like, let's say, SQLite 3 from the command line, enter in a SQL query, and then being able to see the results as it gets sent to standard out. And then understand like, oh, now I know more about what the tables and information.schema are within Snowflake. Let me go to each one of these tables and do a select star limit 5 to understand a little bit more of the actual data in it. And then be able to try to solve harder problems by starting to join those tables together and having all of that happen within a single iteration loop that Claude is managing for you. So an example of like a prompt might be, here is, let's say you have the database credentials securely stored, but use these database credentials in a .env or a config file to use a read-only user and scan the tables that you have available to you in the, let's say in the important data set schema, and then iterate over all of them. And here's a set of SQL queries I want you to be able to run so that you can answer more complicated questions and continue to iterate until you're able to answer them and describe what the results are. And like, that's essentially what the prompt is. And then you watch within this REPL-like environment. There's a lot of different tools that have similar types of REPLs, but Claude Code has been like a great abstraction layer for us. You watch the context be self-generated from the invocations to some SQL query CLI and be able to very quickly build out a deep understanding of the underlying data set without me telling anything to the agent or to Claude Code in the state. And being able to use that then with another CL, like let's say like the AZ CLI from Azure, where you want it to be able to build up context and understanding of the way that you've designed and architected your AZ, either subscription or the overall account, read-only access, and build up knowledge kind of autonomously, again, within that REPL environment of understanding your Azure environment. The same thing with a GCP client or with Boto 3, with AWS. Starting to then create like other tools that are like starting to be more designed for the AI than they are for a person, although they're oftentimes very similar tooling for an AI to be able to understand how to access data, query data, like try to then infer the context of the results in a very autonomous way. And it makes, for us, when we go into a new client, the time to onboard orders of magnitude faster because we could use Claude Code to scan their databases, scan their set of APIs that have their proprietary information. Do all this in either Claude Code Enterprise, where you could deploy that with Azure, or you could do it within like your own Claude account. And it doesn't have to be with Claude. It's just like we've gotten so much out of the CLI. That's where we continue to push stuff. And once you have more AI actually doing the initial investigatory work or the initial requirements gathering or the initial process spec creation, I don't need to tell anyone about the benefits of then using a lot of these tools within a software development workflow, because it's obviously very well established that you can use AI to develop code. And I think that's, I don't need to discuss that because I think that's pretty well known at this point. Like, you still need people that are, that understand the domain and they really appreciate the nuances there to be able to identify when the model goes in an incorrect direction. And I have a couple like kind of interesting anecdotes on that. Like I was, one of the engineers on the team was using, in this case, it was the AZ CLI to be able to figure out why a user on our team was able to access a bastion for one VM, but not able to access a bastion for another VM. It's essentially a tool that you can use, a secure way to authenticate SSH into a VM or instance running within an Azure environment. There was something to do with a role config or a group config that we didn't quite know what was the specific permission that it needed. And we gave access to AZ with a read-only user, but it had elevated permissions to read the underlying configs and just watch it kind of iterate on trying to figure out what the difference was. And it was able to identify there's a very specific permission that this user had that another user didn't have because they're not in a certain group. And so add them to this group, or maybe it was a role, and it resolved the issue. So like worked perfect. It was great. But then there was another nuanced issue where they were accessing it from a certain location. It was more network related, and we tried to do the same thing and it got it wrong. But and so we then said, it got 50% right, 50% wrong, really valuable. But instead of just saying like, yeah, sometimes it's right, sometimes it's wrong, we went back and actually looked at the spec, because we eventually got it right when we figured out what it was later on. And we looked back at the context that we had created for Claude. It was as it was using the CLI for AZ on the second time around. And we realized the actual spec that we gave it, the context that we passed in, was incorrect, or was at least somewhat ambiguous. And so the takeaway there was that everyone knows that sometimes a language model or an agent can be right and sometimes it can be wrong. There's no guarantee that this non-deterministic environment is always going to be a silver bullet. But evaluating why it actually got it an action right or it got it wrong, identified there was actually on the user that made the incorrect specification. And the reason why I'm saying this is kind of twofold. The first part was only a person very familiar with the way that Azure structures its networks and peering would have been able to go in and identify what the issue was in the context that we provided it, to realize that actually, no, it wasn't Claude that got it wrong. It was me that gave it an incorrect spec. And so that expertise was actually like something that was very valuable for us to realize that actually the model did a very good job here. It was the user that did it incorrectly, but not anyone off the street would have been able to identify that, let alone learn from that and realize that they can get it right the next time. And so that was a scenario where like there's still need for like deep domain expertise, almost more so than without it, because the scalability of that domain expertise is so much larger if they can continue to give very good context, very good instructions that only somebody that really understands the domain could do. But the second takeaway for me was the model was a lot smarter than we gave it credit for, because we had blamed the lack of intelligence on the model on the first pass because it got the answer wrong, not because it was partially our fault that it got it wrong. And right now, I feel as though when people are using AI and language models to solve problems, and sometimes they're right, sometimes they're wrong, a non-trivial amount of the errors that it gets something wrong in is not being properly attributed back to user error. And because of that, I think that people have this over-index on the amount of things that Claude actually or any of these language models does wrong, and false attributing it to the language model and not attributing it to the error. And because of that, it's actually smarter than you think. It's your use of the tool that actually is causing the errors. And because you're not attributing it, you're downplaying the actual intelligence or the capability that it has. And I think because of that, it's very important to realize that the proper usage of this tool is the same thing as any other muscle that you need to be able to learn and flex and make mistakes on. And being able to culturally share those mistakes and figure out like what works and what doesn't, and being honest with yourself, and sometimes saying that the reason why it made a mistake was because I actually gave it an incorrect or somewhat ambiguous request that otherwise the model, like there was no inherent way to know. And I was actually talking to this with Aviv, who recently joined Hedgineer, an awesome guy. And he was making the comparison of a really smart kid coming out of college, working at a company where there's no training, there's no context, there's no support. And after a couple years, you look at what that really bright kid had done, and just the level of output wasn't really commensurate with at least what you thought that they were capable of at the beginning, and attributing that completely to the individual and zero on the organization. And they go on to another job, and they're like, oh, wow, now they have great context, they have a support system, great documentation, opportunities to learn and grow, and suddenly they knock it out of the park. And then you look at that holistically and you realize, well, in some cases, it was that first company that they worked with. Maybe like there's always a fault in the individual. I'm not saying models are perfect, but people oftentimes have the experience of sometimes working in an environment where they shine, and sometimes working in an environment where they are restricted and limited on like the maximum opportunity they have. And I think that's oftentimes the same way in the efficacy of how different organizations or individuals are using AI and experiencing either success and failure, and not always attributing that sometimes to themselves and the user value. So that is something that organizations can inherently improve on. But there's a lot of like really cool anecdotes that we had. Like I'm excited to like chat with Thomas, where I was working with Claude Code, and it deleted my entire working directory that had, shame on me, about a week's worth of code that was not checked in, just complete rm-rf dot, or like the location, the path, and just nuked it. But it was actually really cool how you could actually chat with previous sessions of Claude Code to understand how you could use Claude Code also as a tool as an archival system or a recovery system. I'm not going to go any more on that. I'll chat with it next week, but that was a bit of a panic mode. But yeah, super excited about this season. Excited to share kind of like some growth and updates with Hedgineer, but even just like some personal stuff. Like, so there's another thing that happened that was kind of a big deal. I became a father about 11 months ago. Beautiful baby girl. Her name's Liv. She's healthy, cuddly. She's now kind of at that stage where like she can play with daddy. She can kind of say dada. And that's been awesome. Like, so raising a kid in New York, like I'm originally from Michigan. I thought that bringing a kid up in the city was going to be like hectic, cars everywhere, traffic, you feel constrained, but it's actually been pretty awesome. Like we live in Gramercy. We have Madison Square Park right by us. There's Union Square Park by us. There's tons of like moms and parent groups that are all over the place. That we feel like we're kind of part of a community and we can just go outside without having to live in a car and just stroll her over to the park. I've fallen in love with like how cool it is in Peter Cooper Village. Like, I think it's like the best kept secret within Manhattan of how cool like Peter Cooper Village is, and Stuytown as a whole, because it's like almost blocked off from the city with awesome like trees and growth and open green spaces, and just bringing Liv and strolling her around there where it's kind of quiet, just down the block from us. And seeing all these parts of the city that I hadn't kind of like seen or I guess appreciated till we had a kid. And so that's been an update. Recently went to the first international trip with Liv. We got back like a week and a half ago from Basque Country within like the Spanish-French border. New York just started these direct flights to Bilbao like a month ago. And so on the day before the 4th, we flew into Bilbao, stayed right by the Guggenheim Museum, and then like kind of walked the river walk, went to the old town, had pinchos for the first time. I don't know if anyone's familiar with pinchos, but like they're like these Spanish tapas. A lot of the bars have them and they're just knockout. And then we rented a car, drove up the coast from Bilbao to San Sebastian, which is like the food capital of the world. Like I appreciated that beforehand, but like appreciate even more when we were there. Went to some pretty awesome spots there. Basically, like we went to this awesome steakhouse called Bar Nestor. We waited in line for like 45 minutes, chatted up with this awesome couple from Australia. I gave them probably the best financial advice they've ever had. I was like, hey, buy Solana ASAP. I think it was at 140 and then it ripped to like 205 within like 2 weeks after that. I don't normally provide financial advice, but pretty bullish on it for a myriad of reasons. And then from San Sebastian, drove up to Biarritz, which is like on the Spanish-French border. Stayed at this like awesome palace that was built by Napoleon III. Liv hung out in the pool the whole time. We walked the beach, and then drove up into Bordeaux and stayed at this like, what was the name of that place? It was La Catalie. It was on this like 13th century French vineyard. Sally loved it. Liv was like, she kind of liked walking through the vineyard and stuff and like riding on the back of the bike as we checked out the resort, but it was super chill. And then flew out of Bordeaux City. Got back like a week and a half ago. So super refreshed. I don't know exactly why I'm telling you about that, but it was an awesome trip. If anybody needs recommendations about Bordeaux or Basque Country, let me know. My wife has like an awesome Excel spreadsheet about all the places that we went, what was good, what wasn't. And yeah, it made me like excited to figure out like what our next travel plans are. I was asking her, what are we doing for Christmas just last night? And so, yeah, so like that's a little bit about what's happened since we had season 1. And we're now just kind of kicking off season 2. The company's evolved, the topics are evolved, the guests are evolving. And I'm evolving as just a person and an owner of a company, just trying to build cool stuff and share it with people that are interested in hearing about it. We're excited about going down the second season journey with you, and follow along, ask questions, reach out to me, and hopefully you'll hear from us soon. Take care.